So here are some notes on how to write an absolute value equation, but more importantly, absolute value inequality. So I would like you to jot down notes to write an absolute value inequality. And this is what we need to understand before you write it down, guys. Check this out. Write down some big giant absolute values. Write down an x, write down a minus, and then right here, this is where you're going to have a number right here. But this number is actually going to represent the midpoint of your two locations, all right? And then you have an equal sign, and out here you're going to have another number, and that other number is going to represent the distance from your point, from any point to the midpoint. I know that sounds really weird, but this is the format for creating any absolute value equation when they give you the two answers, the 2 points, okay? And we're also going to take it a step further and be able to write the absolute value inequality. So instead of this equal sign, instead of the equal sign, you need an inequality. And if the areas are apart, you're going to use the greater than symbol. Now, I put OR in red to help you remember when you're going to use the greater than symbol. The greater than symbol is when the areas are apart. Now, if the areas are together, then it's going to be a less than symbol. Okay? So go ahead and copy these notes down. I'm going to pause it. Okay, so this is the format, and these are going to be numbers, right? So let me give you an example. It's down here. We have a graph. The areas are together. Okay. Let me make this smaller. So here's your format. Everybody should start by doing this. Absolute value of x minus the midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. So if we look at these two dots, the -5 and the -1, what's the midpoint? -3, right? So let me underline that. That's the midpoint. So I'm going to put -3 right in here because that's what it says. The midpoint goes right here. And then equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. So how far is it from the point to the midpoint? And if you're like, which point? It doesn't matter which one. How far is it from here to here? 2 units. How far is it from here to here? 2 units. Distance is always positive. So we have a 2 right here. So this is an absolute value equation, but that would not give you areas. In order for it to be an area, it has to be an inequality. And so instead of an equal sign, we want either a greater than symbol or a less than symbol. So what do you guys think? Is it going to be a greater than symbol or a less than symbol? Less than symbol, right? Greater, I emphasize the OR on greater, even though that's not how you spell it. Anyways, the greater is apart. The word or means they're apart, and right here the areas are together. So it's going to be a less than symbol, and they're both solid, so they're going to have to be less than or equal to. So to get this completely right, you're going to go less than or equal to. Here's your absolute value inequality that actually represents that graph right there. Of course, the only other thing you could do is change that minus to plus plus. Sorry about that. Absolute value x plus 3 is less than or equal to 2. So on the next slide, I reiterate the notes. Check it out. Same thing. It's the format. Absolute value x minus the midpoint. But instead of equals, greater than if the areas are apart, or less than if the areas are together. I don't know if you want to write those additional notes. Greater means that they're apart. Less than means that the areas are together. And of course, this answers the distance from point to midpoint. So on your worksheet, it's really easy. Why is that? Because you're going to have questions like this. And could somebody tell me the midpoint of that guy? 0, right? So when you set this up, the absolute value of x minus the midpoint, what's the midpoint? 0. Close absolute value. And right here, is it greater than or less than? Greater. So you're going to put greater than the distance from the point to the midpoint. What's the distance from the point to the midpoint? 2. So the only thing you could do to clean this one up is just write the absolute value of x is greater than 2. You don't need -0 because -0 is still going to be x. So this is your answer for that example right there. I don't know if you want to jot that down to have an example. I'm pausing it. Let's try another. Don't feel that you have to copy all these down, but do feel that you need to understand them all. Here we go, number 2. Again, the midpoint is 0. On your homework, all 3 questions, the midpoint 0. So what am I going to write? The absolute value of x minus what? Minus 0 is what? Greater than or less than? Less than the distance from the point to the midpoint. What's the distance? 3. So your final simplified absolute value inequality is just going to be the absolute value of x. Closed absolute value is less than 3. Does that make sense? You guys want to see another? Sure. Why not? Here we go. How about this guy? Absolute value of what? X minus the midpoint, which is 0 also, and then is greater than or less than? Greater than or equal to, because the dots are solid, right? And what's the distance from the point to the midpoint? 4. So the only other thing you could do to make it look nicer is not write the minus 0. So you could just write the absolute value of x is greater than or equal to 4. So these are like free points if you think about it, especially because the midpoint is always 0 on our homework. Final one right here. Absolute value of x minus what's the midpoint? 0. Close absolute value is greater than or less than? Less than. Let's not forget the or equal to, because those are solid dots. And what's the distance from the point to the midpoint? 1 unit. So a nicer version of this absolute value inequality will be the absolute value of x is less than or equal to 1. And that's about it. You should be able to do questions 1, 2, and 3 on your homework. And tomorrow we're going to keep reviewing, answering questions, and we should be ready for the test Friday.